And then he wanted to specialize in sustainable design. So the choices for him with work were either San Francisco or New York. I felt New York was too similar to London. So I was like, let's try this California thing for a couple of years and then we'll come back to London.
That was PR firm owner Temi Adamolekun. Welcome to Storied San Francisco. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. Quick announcement. Our dear friends over at Bitch Talk Podcast are celebrating 500 episodes, which kind of blows our minds. The virtual event starts 8 p.m. California time tomorrow night. Go to bitchtalkpodcast.com for more info. In this episode of Storied San Francisco, we'll meet Temi, who today is a member of the executive advisory team at Represent Collaborative. But Temi's story starts in Nigeria. She'll share the story of growing up mostly in London, but visiting her hometown of Lagos with her family fairly often. Temi went to boarding school and then university in England, before landing a PR job at Condé Nast. She met her future husband in Nigeria, and after he graduated from architecture school, the couple moved to San Francisco. Please check back Thursday for part 2, when Temi will tell us about her life in the city, including what she's been up to since this summer's uprising for racial and social justice. Here's Temi.
So I was born in Nigeria, in Lagos, and my family moved to London when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and we lived in London ever since then, and we always had a house in Nigeria, so summer, Christmas, Easter, we'd go back to Lagos, so I always had a really strong connection with Lagos. My parents were very clear on making sure my brother and I've got an older brother, 3 years older than me, they always wanted to make sure we both had that really strong cultural connection, and the best way to create that cultural connection is just spending time immersed in the culture. And when I was 11, I went off to boarding school.
Okay.
In England. And then I graduated, and my first job when I graduated was for Condé Nast. They got a contract publishing program in England where they bounce you around from different titles, so that way you get to experience different titles. So I really enjoyed that. But what I discovered very quickly, I actually enjoyed interacting with the PR people the most. So for me, that was where I got to learn about PR. And I was like, actually, I want that job. So then I moved to working for a PR agency in London, which was just the perfect time, early 20s, working for a PR agency, looking after nightclubs, bars, restaurants. It was literally the dream job.
Yeah.
And then my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and I moved to San Francisco 12, 13 years ago. And my first job here was in-house for a restaurant group. It was Flour and Water when I joined them. And then we opened Central Kitchen, Slew Maria, and Trick Dog. I really enjoyed the job. Did that for a while. And then when I was pregnant, I think the day I left my job, I was 6 months pregnant with our son.
Okay.
And I left to set up my own agency. So it was an easy transition in the sense that I didn't have to learn any new skills. I didn't have to buy any product. And by that point, because I'd been doing PR in San Francisco for a while, I had a really strong network. So I had a lot of referrals within the food industry. And so I did that for a while, working with chefs like Jacques Pepin on his final TV series for KQED.
Yes.
I worked with Mark Bittman on a YouTube series called California Matters about the California food chain. And then over time, I started working in the design industry just through a chance meeting with an interior designer who was happy to work with someone that didn't have any experience in design. And that's where I've been ever since. I really enjoy the space. I really enjoy the work. I really love the clients that we work with. I really enjoy the projects that we get to work on. And that brings me to today.
Did you have memories of Lagos before y'all's move to London?
Not really.
You're pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me, especially now that I'm a mum, my son just turned 7, you kind of see where the lasting memories kick in, and I feel the lasting memories seem to kick in right around 5, 6. Yeah, so before that, not really. I mean, obviously, I'd see photos and stuff, and my brother being older than me, he had memories of life in Lagos before we moved to London. But then also, there was a continuum there because we always went back 3 times a year. Yeah,
separating those, would be difficult. But can you speak to some of those experiences? Yes, you were young, but you know that those two places are very different. I've never been to Lagos. I've been to London, but I'm assuming they're very different.
Yeah.
And also, I'm assuming when you would go back to Lagos, you would see family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the primary difference is based on the location of the two cities. You know, London is obviously in England, in Europe, and Lagos is in Nigeria, in Africa. And in London, we had a very culturally diverse, immersive world. My parents had friends from different countries, so I grew up with that being totally normal, to have friends who are Muslim, to have friends who are Hindu, to have friends of so many different, have friends who are Jewish, just so many different cultures, ethnicities, religions. And the good thing about growing up in that type of environment, you can always meet people where they are because everything has always been normal, so nothing ever feels like other.
Right.
And then by contrast, you've got Lagos in Nigeria, which is African, and everybody, well, not everybody, but the majority of the people there are black.
Yeah. Not a lot of foreigners or...
There is an expat community. It's quite
Okay.
a significant expat community, but just in the same way that San Francisco is majority white,
Right.
and you have people from other places, you have different ethnicities. It's the same thing in Lagos. It's majority black.
Right.
And you do have expat communities, that different people from different countries. But I think one of the most important foundational experiences spending so much time in Lagos created for me was just the belief that you can meet black people at every single strata of life.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And just the Nigerian personality, the Nigerian culture is one that really celebrates life. And there's a lot of strength and power in the Nigerian identity. You know, I said it in one of the Repco meetings really early on, that if you ever try and insult a Nigerian, the basic, on the most basic levels, I'm oversimplifying, but the most basic response is, me, a whole me. And Yvonne Orji does this really well in her stand-up comedy that she just did with HBO, and watch it. But that is basically who we are as people. Like, we feel as a nation, and obviously I'm generalizing, but people feel so secure in who they are that if you try and step to anyone with an insult, with an affront, the immediate response is, me? You're trying to do that to me? So, and I've always carried that with me. And I think also through my parents, through their friends, I've always known black doctors, nurses, pilots, business owners, leaders of industry, people in government. So it was never a case of anything ever feeling out of reach for me.
Right. Now switching back to your life in London real fast. So again, I guess starting in roughly the mid 80s. How was it growing up in London?
Loved it.
Yeah.
I had a really nice childhood, to be honest. I definitely feel really fortunate. It's also really interesting being a mum now and just seeing how I feel about raising our son and how that's impacted by the way I grew up. I had a really nice time. I've got an older brother. I'm really tight with my older brother. My parents were great parents. They're now divorced, but they were great parents. And they just made sure that they exposed us to as many different things as possible. You know, my mom saw that I loved reading really early on, so every week she'd take me to the local library so I could choose a different book, and she'd always buy me books, and she always had this thing that she will usually say no to a request for a toy, but she would never say no to a book. And I do the same thing with my son, and he knows, if he asks me for a toy, I mean, 90% chance it's going to be a no. But if he asks me for a book, and he started to remember, he's like, Mommy, remember, you never say no to a book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, kids get things out of toys, but it's maybe finite, whereas a book is in books in general.
Well, also, one of the things I feel about books, it's the best way to immerse yourself in someone else's experience. So again, it creates a bridge between where you are and that experience of other people being so different. Because I think reading a book is like travel without getting on a plane or getting in a car, because you get to experience something completely different from your day-to-day life.
Absolutely. So what kind of things, you said you went away to a boarding school?
Yeah.
Was it in a different part of England, or?
Yeah, it was in the countryside.
Okay.
I mean, picture Harry Potter and that's it.
Okay. So you were...
Without the magic.
Yeah, I was going to say playing Quidditch and everything else. Do you want to speak to any of that experience, or?
Again, I feel very fortunate. I had a great time. So there's a lot of conversation that's obviously been had about the elitism of boarding schools, and I get it. And for the most part, when you're a kid living that life, you're not necessarily aware of that type of nuance.
Right.
But again, I was really fortunate. It was a very academic school. I was a very academic kid. So for me, that wasn't really a struggle. Whereas I feel if it's not a good match between the type of school and the personality of the kid, that's where the struggle can definitely kick in. But yeah, no, I had a great time. I was there for 7 years, loved it. Still got lots of friends from there. We are on a group chat. One of them was just telling me this morning about a couple of girls from our old school that have just written books. And she was like, oh, you have to get these books. And like all of us, there's about 12 of us on the group chat. And everyone's like, oh my God, I'm going to get Nikki's book.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And what a much better experience than, say, Facebook. So I'm assuming you said 7 years, so I'm assuming that took you into university age.
Yeah.
Did you go to university?
I did.
And you might have mentioned that. I'm sorry if I forgot. But
It's okay.
where, and do you want to speak to anyone?
Yeah, sure. So I went to university in England. I went to the University of Manchester, studied law, because I went to university fairly soon after the O.J. Simpson trial and the Mike Tyson trial and the Tupac case.
Okay.
And
Are those things that that inspired you to go into law? Okay.
Very much so, because it was 3 high-profile black men that, as far as I was concerned, the American judiciary system was determined to bring down.
Right.
So that was also pretty much the beginning of my high level of interest in race dynamics and just how it played out. So I studied law at the University of Manchester. I realized very quickly the sections of law I found most interesting were those that had the strong storytelling element. But then in terms of a career, I'd always been obsessed with working in the music industry. So there was a summer I did work experience and I actually got placed in the PR department.
Okay.
And I had a couple of meetings with the legal team and I was like, oh my God, that legal side is so boring. So that's where I started to kind of course correct. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be a lawyer. And the more I thought about it, because also in England, part of what you have to do, you have to sit through criminal cases. You have to sit through a big criminal case. You have to sit through a civil case.
Do you have to wear the wig?
No.
Okay. Do they do that still?
They do. But when you're just sitting in as a law student, you just get to sit in the back. You don't have to do anything but just like see how it actually plays out. And we've all seen it on TV so many times. It's also dramatic and it's really easy to form opinions. But when you're actually sitting in a room with a guy that tried to kill his girlfriend, I was horrified.
Yeah.
I was like, I absolutely cannot do this under any circumstances on a daily basis. And so I was like, yeah, law's not for me. This magazine world looks more interesting. And that's how I found my way into Condé Nast.
You must be grateful for that.
God, yeah.
I don't know what that's called, a negative experience, or figuring out that you didn't like it.
A moment of clarity.
Moment of clarity, absolutely. Yeah. So now you're. I'm sorry. Were you working for Condé Nast, or was it like an internship?
It was my first job. Yeah.
Got it. And for the parent company, not any specific magazine, or.
Yeah. So they've got this really interesting. I don't know if they still do it, but when I was there, they had this really interesting program called the contract. It was a graduate recruitment program in the contract publishing department. So they would put you to work on different titles. So you would get a lot of titles that Condé Nast was contracted to do for other companies, like the British Airways magazine, the Savoy Hotel magazine, and then I also got to work at different titles. So I spent some time at GQ Brides and I interviewed at Vogue, which I at the time thought would be like my ultimate job. But I realized very quickly, oddly, I found the Brides team to be really fun, and I found those shoots to be really fun because Vogue is just really serious.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's really serious. Like the dresses, like 30 grand dresses. It's all very serious, massive security.
Yeah.
Whereas Brides, yes, they're beautiful dresses, and yes, they're very expensive dresses, but it just felt so much more relaxed. But then I was like, I really don't want to work for a bridal magazine. So
all
just
brides, all the time.
Yeah, I was like, no, that's not for me. For me, the bridal thing's a one-time thing.
Were you traveling for them at the time? This was all London based?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've always traveled a lot personally. Which is, again,
that.
something I've been really fortunate to do all my life. I grew up traveling as a family with my parents, so again, it was always super normal. And the benefit of growing up in London, Europe is really small, and this is also a point in time where all the low-cost carriers were operating. They'd all started operating. EasyJet was like
the
such
Ryanairs
an easy thing.
and all those. Yeah.
So you can get anywhere for like £50 return, and that's like $75.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very easy to do. Me and all my friends, like we'd skip off to different places for long weekends and stuff.
As like teenagers, or
I'd graduated by this point.
A little bit after.
Yeah,
Okay.
So early 20s. I spent a lot of time in Spain. My uncle had a house in Spain, in the south of Spain, so I spent a lot of time there. But other than that, just like everywhere and anywhere. Like if anyone had a great idea to go somewhere, we were like, yeah, let's go. Because it was just really easy to plan. You could go last minute. So I traveled pretty extensively through Europe.
Okay.
And then just over time, I had a great trip to Brazil with friends as well. Northern Brazil, Bahia. And gosh, where else have I been? India, different parts of Africa, South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, India, Thailand, Sri Lanka, the Middle East, been to Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've been around. That's
a little bit.
That's a life lived. I love that. I love that.
A little bit.
Especially now, I'm just so envious of anyone going anywhere. I'm like, tell me all about your travel.
Yeah.
We'll turn this into a travel podcast.
Seriously.
Would you like to talk about meeting the man who is now your husband and
Absolutely.
the father of your? I assume the father of your.
Yes,
child.
he is. Same guy.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. We'll just square all that away. Yeah.
Gosh,
You want to tell that
we've
story?
been together for about 15 years now,
Okay.
and we met through my best friend at a party in Nigeria.
Okay.
Yeah, so we met, and we were friends for, a few months. I can't really remember now. Maybe about 4 months or so.
Was he living there, or?
Yeah, so he's an architect, and
Okay.
he had finished his undergrad. For anyone that's familiar with architecture, there's a lot of school and then work and then back to school.
Right.
So he'd finished his undergrad in architecture, and he was on a work placement for a year in Lagos, Nigeria, which is where we met. So at the point we met, I was designing handbags. And I had a trunk show. So that was a party where we met, and he made his presence felt by offering unwanted critique.
Oh, what a man. He mansplained you, basically, and you're like, I love it.
Yeah, but then
Wow.
we became friends, and then I opened up a little store and tea room for my handbag brand, which was called Tiger Tem. And he helped me with the design as an architect. He's like, I can help you actually bring your dream into reality. I was like, excellent. So that's how we started spending a lot of time together.
Was that back
we haven't
in
looked back.
London or in
Lagos?
In Lagos. Okay,
Yeah.
so you opened a little shop in Lagos.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Yeah.
talk about that? You kind of, I don't think you had mentioned making handbags. Maybe I
Yeah.
missed it, but.
So when I was working in PR in London, I started just kind of thinking about what else I could do. I'd always been obsessed with handbags, and I found out about a short course I could do at Central St. Martin's, the fashion school, in handbag design. So I was like, cool, I'm going to do it. I've always wanted to learn more. I love learning. And so I did the course in handbag design, and as part of the course you have to start making handbags. So I started making these really cool clutch bags using materials from Nigeria that my mum just had lying around the house. And every time I'd use them, people would ask me where I bought them, and so I was like, yeah, let me try and sell them. So it was a great thing to have done in my early 20s. It was so much more work than I ever could have anticipated. It did really well really quickly, which sounds like best case scenario unless you're in your early 20s and you don't really know what you're doing, in which case it becomes a beast that's very difficult to manage effectively.
Right. So, and another reason I wanted to bring your husband in now, one thing I do remember from the beginning of this was that you all decided to move to San Francisco together.
Yes.
So can you kind of not jump straight to that, but can you kind of set the stage and then talk about that decision?
Sure. So I'd been living in London. I started making handbags after doing the course at Central St. Martin's. People were asking a lot about them. One of the things I identified really quickly that could make my handbags different in the market was using Nigerian fabrics, indigenously produced fabrics. So just the strong prints. And then also I found out really early on that a lot of leathers, there's actually massive leather production that happens in Nigeria, northern Nigeria. So Nigeria also has a lot of access to these beautiful leathers, high quality leathers, embossed or stamped leathers in all these beautiful different colors. And then, so initially when I started the company, I was making the handbags myself. I couldn't keep up with demand. So then I was looking into production. I actually went on a trip to Spain. I went to about 3 different handbag factories, which was really good fun. Absolutely loved it. I could speak Spanish. So that was also like really good fun. I really enjoyed being there, just being in that environment. But then I thought, you know what? I really would actually prefer to make these in Nigeria. So I decided to set up production in Nigeria using Nigerian materials, and the business just continued to grow. So I was like, I'm going to try and open an outpost. So that's what led me to opening a store, and I've always been obsessed with tea, cliched growing up in England, but it's true. And so I wanted to, and the space I found was bigger than I needed. So I decided to make half of it into a tea room and keep the other half as a boutique. And I mentioned I'd met my husband, who was an architect, and I met him at one of my first trunk shows for the handbag brand, and he helped me with the design of the store and tea room, so we spent a lot of time together. After about 3 years of this, I was definitely getting massively burnt out. In the interim, I'd spent most of my time in London, and he was on a graduate program in London as well, so we were still together a lot in London. And then he wanted to specialize in sustainable design, so the choices for him with work were either San Francisco or New York. I felt New York was too similar to London, so I was like, let's try this California thing for a couple of years, and then we'll come back to London.
And had you visited, either of you?
He had a long time ago, but I'd never been to California. I'd only been to New York. So I knew absolutely nothing about it, but I was like, yeah, it's 2 years. It's not that big a deal. We're not going to be here that long. If we hate it, we'll leave.
Right. It's a familiar story.
Yeah.
At least for this
I feel
podcast.
it is. I feel it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
can you talk about what you did know about San Francisco?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's really interesting for me because I think people in America forget how little people outside America know about America. So all I knew of California was LA.
Okay, right.
So I knew like pictures and just the whole like LA vibe and the whole LA scene, and I was like, Northern California, what's that?
Yeah, there's something in California that's not Los Angeles?
Yeah. So that was, and also back then there wasn't a ton of information readily available. It's not this, and San Francisco as a city was much smaller then, 12, 13 years ago than it is now.
Yes.
So I knew very little about it. But we were happy we'd both traveled a lot together. He traveled a lot growing up. I traveled a lot growing up. We traveled a lot together in our relationship. So we were very happy to, try something different, have an adventure. We felt it was going to be a short-lived adventure, therefore not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. So he came out ahead of me to San Francisco, and he had to do all the legwork to find us a place, and we ended up finding a place in Potrero.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was home for 10 years.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So literally, you guys decided that you'd move before even visiting. Is that what you're telling me?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because for him, he wanted to do a master's program, so it was either going to be New York or San Francisco, and he asked me, he was like, yeah, what do you think? And I was like, definitely not New York. I'd spent, a bit of time in New York. I'd been out there a few times. I absolutely loved it, but I was like, it's also, to me at the time, it didn't feel like anything different enough from London.
Right.
And I was like, if we're going to do this, I'd rather do something that actually feels quite different from London.
Can we talk about your arrival and
Sure.
your impressions of this
not good.
wacky place?
Yeah, not good.
Okay.
Not good at all.
All right.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Essentially. So, gosh. Okay, so my Toby had been looking for places. We'd found a place in Potrero that we both liked, so it was very much like done via email. I'd find the listings, send him off to look at them. He'd look at them and tell me what he thought. So he thought the place in Potrero, we both liked it from the listing, and then when he went to see it, he really liked it in person as well. It was a new build, so just easier all around to be in a relatively new space as opposed to something that's old that you have to kind of figure out all the things that are wrong with it.
Got it.
So my first impression, so I remember getting on the plane, I was really nervous leaving London. I was like, I have no idea where I'm going. I have no idea what this is going to be like. I was like, 11 hours, because it's not a normal thing for me at that point in time to have been anywhere that far away that was an 11-hour flight.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe South Africa.
Right.
So yeah, there was the length of the flight, and I was like, woof, gosh, that's a long one. And then I landed, and Toby was at college that day, so I got a cab to a hotel because our keys weren't going to be ready for 3 days for our place.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, fine. So we were like, yeah, we'll spend 3 nights in a hotel. So we were in a hotel downtown. I remember driving into downtown and just seeing how dirty the streets were, and also the number of homeless people. Because to be honest, I'd never seen that in a richer country. I'd seen it obviously in Nigeria and developing countries, but I'd never seen it in anywhere in Europe or anywhere I'd been in America. So I was like, what is this? This is so weird.
Right.
So I was a bit unnerved by that. We went out for dinner on the first night, and he was telling me about his experience so far in San Francisco. He was asking me what I made of it. I was like, yeah, I'm really not sure about this, you know, but we're here, so we'll enjoy it. And then we got our keys to our place, and Potrero was beautiful, so I fell in love with Potrero straight away. And then we had a lot of fun settling into our place, like finding our different bits of furniture. and then just like settling into life, meeting people, making friends, which definitely took a while. You know, I was in and out of San Francisco quite a lot at the beginning, so I didn't have a green card yet. And then there are two things that really changed my experience of San Francisco. The first was getting my job at the restaurant group, because then I actually had like real structure for my life. Before then, I'd still been making handbags sporadically. I had a blog for a while, but I just really craved structure and like something and purpose, something to do. I just needed something to do.
And a community or a network of folks. And I mean, the restaurants part doesn't hurt anything.
And it was a great restaurant, great team. Still love them now. Still one of my favorite restaurants in San Francisco. I still think Fly on Water does the best pizza in San Francisco.
Okay.
And this is how it works for me with PR. I don't say that because I work there. I work there because I felt that.
Got it.
Because my husband and I had been there for dinner quite a few times, and I was like, oh my god, this is like such a great restaurant, and it just felt so progressive and so different from everything else. And I was like, it'd be amazing if I could work here one day. So I saw a listing on Craigslist. I was like, I'm gonna apply, me and 5,000 other people.
Right.
And somehow I got the job.
Nice. Thanks, Craigslist, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, so that was like the first thing that really changed my experience of San Francisco. And then the second one was having my son.
That was Temi Adamolekun. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, Temi will tell us about her work in the city, as well as starting a family here. She'll also speak to the current movement for racial and social justice. Join us for part 2 this Thursday. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me. Michelle and I have produced more than 130 episodes over the last 3 years, and you can find them all at our website, storiedsf.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can like, comment, and share the stuff we put out. Find the podcast just about everywhere you can listen, including, most recently, BFF.FM's new podcast network. Please subscribe to stay up to date on all the content we publish. We love feedback, so if you have any, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.